Hey, welcome to another Orbiter 2010 video. And in this video I am back out here several thousand seconds away from Titan. What I've found out in the last few days after posting my other videos is that I can actually use the atmosphere of Titan to eliminate all my velocity. So I don't actually need to use any main fuel to get into orbit around Titan. That's a good thing, because at this point, I don't have tons and tons of fuel. Now, I've tried several different things, and I'm kind of a little bit torn on what's ideal, because at least in the experience that I've had in the last few days, yes, you can eliminate all the velocity, but you do so at great peril, or nearly great peril. So I'll show you what I mean, at least I'll try, and then maybe we'll consider some different ideas for what might be a little bit better. And a lot of this is just trial and error on my part. Again, these are learn with me videos. I'm certainly not saying that this is the right way to do it by any means. But for starters, let's kind of get oriented so that we're prograde. That's good enough. And let me bring up Orbit MFD and reference Titan. So I can see here that my periapsis is 67 kilometers. And near as I can tell, with the type of velocity that we're going to have, there's no way to survive re-entry, or there's no way to survive atmospheric braking if you're any less than about 136 kilometers, somewhere close to that number. If you get down to 130, then I haven't tried every single possible AOA setting, so I don't know for sure, but somewhere around 136 kilometers seems to be where you have to be to survive. And you're barely surviving. I mean, the vessel is almost overheating. So one idea that I've got is to go retrograde and bleed off maybe 1,000 meters per second or something like that. That wouldn't use, it would use a little bit of fuel, but you'd still have a lot left. And then that would allow you to have a more, delicate atmospheric ride. And the other thing is G-force. When you look at Aerobrake, you can see the G meter, it's getting up there. So in terms of human spaceflight, you have to take that into account. So let's just see what we can do here.
Translation.
And we're going to translate our PEA so that it's close to that 135, 136, somewhere in there. And there was also a bit of discussion in one of the parts, I think it was part 5, where you can use Aerobrake even out here. Hang on one moment. Even out here at this distance to help you start setting up, your atmospheric braking. You do have to select reference and type in the body because we're too far away at this point for it to be auto-referenced. This can be helpful, but I'm not entirely sure how to read it to get exactly what I need. Because
rotation,
if we start rotating to get an AOA, of like 50 or 60, you know, it doesn't show us closing in around Titan. And obviously it doesn't, you know, tell us yet, you know, what our G-force would be. So to the extent that this is useful, I'm not real sure until we get closer in. Once we get closer in, it's useful. So let's close our distance a little bit. We've got our PEA close to what it's going to have to be, and we're still quite a ways out, so let's warp time in. Okay, we're getting reasonably close. Getting a little further, right about there. And let's go ahead and close up retro doors and radiator. Finally. Okay, so here we're going to have a PEA of 139. I'm worried that might be a little high because the range for getting yourself captured and getting a, you know, an orbit established is pretty narrow, at least based on the little bit of experimenting I've done. And we're going to get very hot. In my experimenting, we're going to redline the vessel.
80%.
But here again, even as close in as we are to Titan at this point, I'm questioning how to read Aerobraking MFD for useful information, because again, it's not showing that we're going to close in the orbit yet. It will show that here in a little bit, but it's not showing it now. And, you know, the G meter here it's increasing, decreasing. So in terms of using this as an indicator for when you're going to burn up, I don't know. Anyway, we're getting pretty close here. We're about 325 kilometers, and we're now getting a little bit of atmospheric drag. I can hear it. You can see we're heating up. And there's quite a few different ways you can do atmospheric braking. Obviously, you don't have to necessarily get the entire orbit established on your first pass. If you go back to one of my videos from earlier this year where I did atmospheric braking at Mars, you can see that you can do multiple passes to get the orbit completely established. But if possible, we would like to do it in one pass. So here we are, we're heating up now. Unfortunately, I can't bring up the temperature display on an external MFD, or I would. So we have to be in this view to see the temperature display. And we're still 40 seconds away
26.
from our lowest point.
Mach 25. Mach 24. Warning, hull temperature.
Yeah, it looks like I'm a little
Mach
too
23.
low. I don't think I'm going to
Warning,
survive
hull
this one.
temperature. Mach 22. Warning, hull temperature. Mach 21.
No, we're going to survive. We're cooling
Warning,
off.
hull temperature. Mach 20.
It's close.
Mach 19. Mach 18.
It's a cool view of Saturn in the background.
Mach 17.
So you can see we've lost close to 4,000
Mach
meters per second
16.
already. Now our orbit's starting to bend in here, according to Aerobraking
Mach
MFD.
15.
We're almost at periapsis.
Mach 14.
So
Mach
that's
13.
one approach you can use. It's not an approach I would like, though. It's just, I mean, if you think about it in terms of human spaceflight, or even if you're sending a probe, you're not going to want to get to the point where you're just a few degrees away from
Mach
incinerating. I
11.
mean, that's not realistic.
Mach 10.
But once we're at this point, we can basically start watching our eccentricity, and when it drops below 1, then we can start thinking about pitching down a little bit.
Mach 9.
And if we wanted, before we got to this point, we could have increased our AOA a bit more to flatten the vessel out a little bit, to get a little more of the vessel facing the atmosphere, more surface area. I don't know that it would do any good to do that now, but I guess we can find out. Yeah, we're almost below 1 there. We are now, so we're captured. And you can see our APA coming way down. So if we wanted to plan on going around, which we do want to do because we're not lined up with the base, then once the APA gets a little lower, we're going to want to zero out and then
Mach
basically
7.
climb back up a little bit so we can get into an orbit. Or if we wanted to, we could even do that now and then just plan on going around a few times. But I don't see any benefit in doing that. We want to lower our APA as much as possible while we're still here, you know, in deep enough in the atmosphere to get some additional drag. You can see it's coming down nicely. Okay, here in a moment I'm going to exit out and come back in and try just one other method. But I just want to see what kind of orbit we can establish here first. And so far this was all done without using any main fuel. It's getting pretty good there. Start lowering our AOA. Okay, so that's basically the idea. Now we've got an APA of about 560 kilometers, so we would come around to this point. And if we aren't in a good position to get lined up with the base, then we would probably need to raise our PEA a little bit, so it would require a little bit of a burn there. But depending on where the base is at, we might be able to come up to apoapsis and then just plan on landing right over here somewhere without ever having to do any kind of circularization or anything like that. But you get the idea. It's go ahead and turn this off for now.
Warning. Center of gravity shift offline.
It is possible to eliminate, all that velocity without having to do any kind of burn. Not real safe, but you can do it. All right, let's go back into that scenario. And one other thought that I had,
All Vanguard
I haven't
systems
actually tried
nominal.
this yet, but one other thought that I had, if we reference Titan, copy that information over to the HUD,
Rotation.
and then we find out basically what our, what some kind of ideal approach velocity would be, because what we just had, somewhere a little over 9,000, I don't think that's ideal. It's a little much. So we could say, well, let's bleed off 1,000 meters a second. That's not going to use a tremendous amount of fuel, and it'll make for a much safer approach there into Titan, in theory. So simply retrograde main engine burn till we see this down to about 7,800. And
Translation.
oops.
Rotation.
And actually, as part of this burn, if I do a bit of rotation, yeah, I can raise my PEA while doing this retrograde burn so that I don't have to do two separate burns. Okay, we'll go with that. That brings that bled off about 1,000 meters per second. So now we'll go back to prograde, facing Titan. And you can see we really didn't use a ton of fuel there, about 5%, I believe. And now we'll just set this up again. Let's get in a little closer before we adjust the PEA. Well, actually, let's not get in closer,
Translation.
because the farther out we are, the less fuel we use. Let's go down to 134 this time because we are slower. Okay. And again, Aerobraking MFD can help us a little bit.
Rotation.
But for me, what seems to be working the best here is just a bit of trial and error. Okay, now let's warp time in again. Okay, getting really close. Turn on the APU. Retro radiator. AOA. Now we can just compare this approach to the other one and see if bleeding off 1,000 meters per second was enough. Was it worth it? Was it worth the fuel? I would say yes. And it might even be worth it to bleed off 2,000 meters a second. Let's just kind of see what our... Let's let our temperature display be our judge on that one. So let's go ahead and warp time in a little bit more.
APU fuel 80%.
Somewhere around 320 or so, I start hearing the atmosphere in my headset. Yeah, there it is. And I don't know that 50 degrees AOA, I don't know that that's necessarily ideal. 45 might be better. 65 might be better. The G-force here would be, I assume, what would dictate what you wanted your AOA to be. You know, you want to have a G-force that's reasonable.
Mach 24.
And if you look here at our secondary HUD, we can see what our G is right now. Now we're at 1G. So here we are again.
Mach 23.
Let's see where our temperature ends up at this hottest point.
Mach 22.
Yeah, to me this seems
Mach
much more
21.
reasonable. I mean, we're slowing down significantly, so we're going to start cooling off here in a moment.
20.
And we peaked here, you know, without ever getting into the
Mach
yellow.
19.
So, I mean, I don't know about you, but if I were inside this vessel, I would be much more
Mach
comfortable
18.
with this flight, even though we did use a little bit of fuel to do it.
17.
And I didn't pay attention to what the G was previously, but
Mach 16.
here I think it was... Actually, I didn't catch what the maximum was here either.
Mach 15. Mach 14.
And if we wanted to, we could do this even safer, obviously, by, you know, bleeding off 1,500 meters a second instead of 1,000, or 2,000 meters a second, whatever. But this looked reasonable to me.
Mach 12.
Depending on the G-force, that might have been a bit high. So maybe bleeding off another 500 or 1,000 might be worth it,
Mach 11.
just to bring the G max down. But as in terms of temperature, this seemed perfectly reasonable to me. So now we're at periapsis,
Mach 10.
and we still got a little ways to go to close the orbit. And what we might be able to do this time, since last time I ended up with a negative periapsis, maybe if I start lowering the AOA now, because I'm still going to get captured, no doubt about that.
Mach 8.
Okay, we're captured. Now the PEA is starting to drop, so maybe lowering the AOA will help us out there, so we won't have as much circularization to do. Although this may not be worth it, because if we end up with a really high apoapsis, then it may be better to have an APA at 500 kilometers and then have a small amount of circularization to do to bring up the PEA rather than going way out. But there, at this point, that's all kind of personal taste and depending on how you want to do your mission. Yeah, we're still losing. We're still ending up with a relatively low PEA anyway, so I guess it didn't really do us a lot of good. And our apoapsis is going to be out there quite a ways. So I guess we probably should have just left the angle of attack where it was. But at any rate, that's a second idea for doing this. I can't really think of a third way to try this without just being totally redundant. So let me turn off the APU.
Warning, center of gravity shift offline.
And that's going to be fine. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video here. I just wanted to come back and show an idea for using the atmosphere Titan as a brake so that we wouldn't have to use very much fuel. You got a couple different ways to do it there. You can either be a little bit dangerous with it and use no fuel, or you can use a little bit of fuel and have a much safer approach. For me, I would rather take the second approach there and come in not having to worry so much about possibly overheating. So that's going to be it. I'm going to wrap it up. If you liked the video, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you next time.